Like if you imagine you're in this cave, like where there's just all these limestone structures around you, like what are you as the catalyst or the change agent gonna do to like turn that cave into an architectural digest, living room, that looks like, Eames created all the furniture. Like it's one thing, and you're gonna try to turn it into something totally different.
Hi, I'm Tracy Lovejoy.
And I'm Shannon Lucas. We are the co-CEOs of Catalyst Constellations, which is dedicated to empowering Catalyst to create bold, powerful change in the world.
This is our podcast, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out, where we speak with Catalyst executives about ways to successfully lead transformation in large organizations.
And today I'm super thrilled to have my friend Scott Kirsner here, the CEO of Innolead. He spent more than 2 decades as a business journalist and contributing editor at the Boston Globe, Wired Magazine, Fast Company, and the New York Times. His focus is on how innovations that matter get introduced to the world. And it's taken him to the White House, Sundance Film Festival, the United Nations, and into the really cool innovation labs of some places like Google and Disney, General Motors, Delta, and more. I have to say, I know few people in the world who know more about both the vision and the brass tacks of innovation in large organizations than Scott, which is why I'm so grateful to have you here today. Hi, Scott.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
So fun. All right. So I'd love for you, I gave you like the high snippets, but I'd love for you to introduce yourself and hear about your catalytic journey, maybe sharing a few career highlights that you're proud of.
Well, that's a great opening question. Thank you for asking it. I always felt like I was going to go into some kind of journalism, media, publishing type of job. Like it just was always my trajectory growing up and being on the newspaper in high school and college. I got a great job at the Boston Globe in the mid 90s, helping them figure out what their digital publishing strategy should be and really executing on the strategy, building the first website for the newspaper. And this is at a time it was owned by the New York Times Company. So, the Globe was part of a larger public company. And my 2 co-founders at Innolead are people that I met in that era, in the mid 90s, trying to figure out what should newspapers do online? What is the business model? How do you sell ads? How do you build community? All of like the key questions for digital publishing. And, we had that experience of doing it inside a large company where often you're scrapping for resources. There were other teams, in New York that were doing similar things with a different approach, maybe a little more brand sensitive because they worked for the New York Times and we were in Boston working for the Globe. We could kind of be faster and more experimental, I think. And a lot of that experience, we kind of lean on now. As you mentioned, I did a lot of writing and journalism and just had fun traveling around the world, going to cool companies and cool events. And then in 2013, we started Innolead, kind of with that context in mind, right? Of like, there are lots of people with lots of different titles who are catalysts and change makers. And since you already said shit, I can say shit disturbers inside established organizations. And there was just like nobody, there were a lot of consultants serving those people, but there was nobody that was like the unbiased source of information and research and connections that was out there that like, wasn't trying, wasn't McKinsey trying to sell you $1 million consulting project. And like, I know you probably took pitches from all these consultants when you were in corporate roles. And we just kind of had a little bit of that journalist mindset of, could you provide information that people would trust and gather data that people would trust to help all these people who were like all in very similar roles, to what we had experienced, way back in the early days of the web.
Yeah, I do have to put a plug in for Innolead because when I was in the corporate world, I was a member for years, and I really appreciated that safe container and that sort of, learning-based, co-learning-based community that you bring together. And I'm excited that we're going to get to talk about some of your new research that's come out. But I just want our listeners to understand really the value that you provide to that ecosystem.
Thanks for saying that. I mean, we met very early in the life of Innolead. I think when you were still at Vodafone,
Yep.
making stuff happen as a, agent of change there. And I'm trying to remember what year it would have been, but maybe like 2014,
Probably. Yeah.
like the second year we were working on Innolead. Um,
I
and
didn't
so
realize you
fun
were
to
so
watch what
new then. You were already crushing it out of the gate. So that says a lot about how you move through the world, Scott. All right.
well,
We have
yeah.
the. Sorry, go ahead.
No, no, no. I was just gonna say, like 2013 was like very much our lean startup year of like, is there something here? Could we build it? And then yeah, by 2014, we felt like, okay, we figured out there's people who need this.
And well, sorry, one more shout out, and I never do this, but also your the events that you convene are always just such a great place of learning and community building and stuff. So if you guys get a chance, go to the Innolead Impact. All right, so we had the conversation because I've known you for a while, but I was like, do you identify as a catalyst? So I'd love to hear sort of your definition of a catalyst and what it means to be a catalyst executive.
Well, I mean, I love that you guys have been defining this term and, the anthropology of being a catalyst in a large organization. And I do feel like, you've kind of taken ownership of the word in a big way. Um, you know, we, I think I tend to think about catalysts as people who are in some way going against the grain and bringing in new ideas, and they're often a little more externally focused than their colleagues.
Mhm.
Um, and they don't last long in big companies, frankly. Big companies can drive them crazy. Just because I always like to say, there's so many incentives to be in the office and be in meetings and be present on Zoom in large companies, and so few incentives to be like on a university campus or
Mm.
out at a conference or at a startup pitch day. There's almost no incentives for that stuff. People think you're goofing off. And like that's the stuff that catalysts often view as important, right? Is like gathering signal from the outside world. And I guess the last thing I would say about catalysts is gathering signal is such an important job. And it's, I think, what they're good at, right? Like seeing patterns that others in the company don't see, understanding trends, just picking things up. Like when they go to their kid's soccer game or they go to a backyard barbecue, like they will just hear things. They're like, oh, we should be moving, we should be building something around that, that dynamic. And like we have some data that's probably like 7 or 8 years old now that basically says the problem in large companies is not the gathering signal and understanding what's happening. It's the doing something about it. It's like creating the mechanisms to like act on those insights. And I think, to me, that's like the heart of what is so hard about being a catalyst, right? Is you see stuff happening and you want to act on it. And like the organization is like, hey, can you talk to us after the big annual trade show? Or can you talk to us after the earnings call? Or can you talk to us after we finish, version 3.18 of our product? You know?
Yes, yes, I do painfully know, Scott. Yeah. I'm wondering, so like the combination of, you as a catalyst and the way you've been able to blaze this amazing trajectory for yourself, how has being a catalyst been able to support your trajectory and being a catalyst and being an executive and a CEO and co-founder now?
That's a really good question. I mean, I I feel like, mostly I've been, I had a phase in my life post like leaving the Boston Globe where I was really just an independent journalist. And I don't know that I would have called myself a catalyst at that point, except for the commonality of like, being able to work to survive as a journalist is you have to sort of have that signal gathering ability and like just being able to see like, oh, there's a story here that nobody else really sees, or there's something important about this company and I want to write about them before other people do. But then you're not really trying to like affect any kind of organizational change, really. I think it was not until, and so I spent, 10 or 12 years like writing articles and writing books. And it was really not until we started Innolead that I think, now I kind of view myself as a journopreneur. And, I think that like most entrepreneurs, like you have to be a catalyst all the time. And you're not really encumbered by a lot of structure and a lot of process around you, which makes it much easier. to say like, oh, let's try something new. Like last year, I
Mm.
think the first half of last year, we were like, well, what would happen if we put a bunch of Innolead content, like our best content, into an LLM and let people chat with it? Would that be more helpful than emailing someone on our team or using the search box on the website? And like, we don't have a general counsel as as a startup, and nobody could tell us not to do it. And so we just did it. And like, I just think, I almost hesitate to use the word catalyst when you're, a sub 10 person company, right? Because you can be so nimble. You don't have risk and compliance departments, jumping on you for everything you suggest. And yeah, I don't delude myself into thinking that like, oh, I'm doing the same thing with our little media and events company that somebody's doing inside, Vodafone, IBM, Starbucks, Marriott, BMW, that scale of company. We try to understand it and understand what those catalysts go through, but like, I don't think I'm the same, I'm in even a similar role to them.
Fair. And a lot of our listeners are in big organizations, but I would say just because you found an environment where it's easier to see the signal through the noise, do the sense making, and then actually do the doing, and then even get to play and pivot on it. Like those are all the classic catalyst traits that follow us no matter where we go. But I'm glad that you found a place where you get to have your own sandbox to play in and don't have to hash it out with legal 10 times.
Yeah. And I also just think, some of it is about like finding the right size organization, like I really empathize and relate to sole proprietors. Like, that is so hard. I kind
So
of feel
hard.
like small team is really like my context where I enjoy working. And I can go to like meetings at bigger companies where I might be a contributor. As you mentioned, I still write a column for the Boston Globe, and I can go to meetings at the Globe and try to contribute and chime in here and there. But like, I just feel like once it's a 500,000, 10,000 person organization, that's just not my milieu.
Yeah, well, and you're providing a ton of value. So normally we ask the following question sort of on a more personal basis, but I'd be remiss if we weren't tapping into the great wisdom that you have been bringing to the world. You shared with us a preview of your latest research report, The Future of the Innovation Team, which of course is near and dear to my heart, but also to a lot of our listeners. So I'd love to just start off with, can you share one or two or even the top four challenges if you want, and maybe like double click a little bit and help us understand why they're on the list right now?
Yeah, well, this is all data from, gathered in Q2 of 2024, so relatively fresh. And I think to me, one of the most interesting questions, there's info about AI and team size and budgets and, what are your metrics in the report. But to me, the most interesting question just is about what are the biggest pressures on you and your team in 2024? And the five things that rose to the surface are, can you have more impact on revenue growth, please? Can you help our company move faster, become more agile is in second place. Help the company culture be more innovative, which feels very closely tied to that second place pressure. Do more with less, which you and I have talked about. If you put a nice positive spin on that, it's like the power of minimalism, you called it in this LinkedIn live we did earlier this year. But often do more with less is like, hey, here's, $5,000, like go build a product. And then the last one is helping the company understand and adopt new technologies, especially AI right now. And I guess the question I would ask you is like, if someone put you in a corporate role and said, can you do all five of those things, please? Even if you had a team of 10 people, let's say, which is decent sized right now for a corporate innovation team, could you do all five of those things? Or would you say, like, actually pick two, pick two and try to move the needle on those?
I think it's a really great question. And when we work with organizations on the Catalyst programs, we force them to prioritize because they'll be like, we want these five things. And I'm like, that's cool. And when we come to decision making, I need you to prioritize them because choices I make to deliver number one are going to impact how much I can deliver on number five. So I think it's really true. And I think that there's an interesting conversation sort of going to the culture piece, because as you mentioned, really like 3 of the top 4, in my opinion, are sort of like cultural process things. And so tipping it back to you a little bit, because you guys have some other sort of places, insights that you landed, is like, is that the role? Is the culture building the role of people who are leading, specifically innovation, like trying to you say trying to change the culture is a tar pit. Don't get stuck in it. And yet these are the demands that are being put on us. So I'm wondering what your takeaway is from that.
I just feel after 10 or 11 years of watching people try to have impact on culture as a 10-person team, inside a 10,000 person company, that you can put on some fun events, and you can make some swag, and everybody suddenly has a stress ball that says, innovate at Acme Company or whatever. And that can make people feel good in these brief ways. But I just really honestly believe that company cultures, um, if the founder is still alive, if it's a company like Meta where you've still got, Zuckerberg walking the halls, or it's SpaceX and Elon Musk is hanging out, that founder is the biggest influence on culture. And, the same is true of small startups when the founder is still around. Like, they really are shaping the culture, like through their behavior and what they talk about in meetings, and how they behave, you know, uh, when their colleagues are around them. And I just think that in every other company where there still isn't a founding team member, the culture just accretes like stalactites and stalagmites over the years. And so, like, if you imagine you're in this cave, like where there's just all these limestone structures around you, like, what are you as the catalyst or the change agent going to do to like turn that cave into an architectural digest, living room, that Eames created all the furniture. Like, it's one thing, and you're going to try to turn it into something totally different. I think that, that sort of cultural impact just takes such a long time, in the way that like stalactites and stalagmites don't form overnight. And companies have such short attention spans that I just feel like it can be diluted to say, like, and for my next 3-year stint at this company, I'm going to change the culture so we're more agile and people don't feel like it's a slow moving, analysis paralysis kind of place.
So I don't disagree in a lot of ways. I guess, what's your advice for people then? Like, because as they're saying, with 100 people that you interviewed, they're saying the pressures on their team is to help the company move faster, become more agile, help the company culture become more innovative. Are you saying it's a fool's errand and they should leave their job?
For some, maybe it's like the key is like finding out what the context that you're going to be happy in is, and we do see a lot of people who seem happy in large companies until the moment that the large company is like, we don't really need you and your team anymore. And, you know, often they go into consulting advisory work. You don't typically see like somebody from a giant utility company then wind up at a 10-person, Y Combinator startup next. So I think the one thing is thinking about, well, where do you function best? And I don't know, I just always think, in some ways, EVP and SVP titles come with that curse of like, great options packages and all kinds of perks and great salaries. And that can really keep you from going to join like a medium-sized company where like you might be a lot happier, right? Really having ownership of, or being closer to like the gears of power at a 2,500 person company, but you could just never take that pay cut. So I just think there's, you know, I am saying that, if you're not talking about a time frame of like years or decades, and the decade word really scares people in, publicly traded or all kinds of large companies, the question to ask is like, what does the end point really look like of help us
Mhm.
be more agile or help us be more innovative. Um, Maybe you could convince yourself that like having a once a year idea challenge or even having the business units all run their own idea challenges and make sure that that stuff gets in the pipeline is an impact on the culture. And, maybe it is like if that really is generating stuff that moves the needle in some way, like makes customers happier, more loyal, or delivers more revenue growth, like, okay, you probably are changing the culture in, in a concrete way. But a lot of times people are truly trying to boil the ocean, and like you've probably seen people where they like travel around to every branch office of the company all around the world. And they're like, what can I and my team of 10 people do to impact the way people are working in Singapore and, Senegal and London, you
Oh
know?
yeah, I lived that life. That was definitely something I tried. What I hear you say, which is, when we're coaching with leaders, is at least getting the clarity on what the trade-offs are for you, right? So are you going to be able to make incremental progress with, in a large organization? And is that satisfying because you're getting other things like maybe the rewards and remuneration or whatever, versus might you be interested in being in a 2,500 person organization and have more impact, but there's potentially financial trade-offs versus the total freedom that you have to be like, hey, and we're going to put all our stuff in an LLM and have AI take a shot at it. And so it's like the clarity, and then because it's when you want something else and you're stuck in this that it becomes really untenable, right?
Yeah, I do think it is, and just there's sort of a problem I think in this innovation space, which is um, I think a lot of the consultants and trainers, frankly, like because they have to work in short time frames and they have to say like, here's a project that's 3 months or 6 months or a year, right? Like they are viewing things through too narrow of a time lens when really like honestly if I got together with a group of innovation consultants for dinner tonight in Boston, they would all agree with me that years and decades, like the commitment of resources and C-suite support needs to last over decades probably before everybody in the large company believes that like, oh, this is actually a real capability that's going to be here today, tomorrow, and in 2035, not just like the idea challenge that pops up for a couple years and then disappears, because the company decides they don't want to keep giving out, $1,000 in Apple Watches every year or whatever they give out as prizes.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think there are a handful, there's not a lot, but I think there are a handful of exceptions like what Satya did at Microsoft and how quickly he did that culture change. But then goes back to the point that you were talking about the executive support. So before we move off of it, if someone is in a role and they are being asked to help the company move faster and become more agile or help the company culture be more innovative, have you seen what are the like top three things that you've seen move the needle even maybe incrementally?
I mean, I think when I hear more agile and move faster, to some extent, you're either like got to be hacking away at some bureaucracy and some things that slow people down, right? Maybe creating some test beds or playgrounds where people can run experiments without having to go through all of the hoops and stage gates of like a national product launch, at a P&G or whatever. And like you can imagine how many checks and balances are involved in that process. So like hacking away at the bureaucracy is one thing. And sometimes it's bringing in like new technologies and new tools, maybe that are outside of the standard, Microsoft, Salesforce, Oracle, you know, uh, big tech infrastructure and getting people using tools that, that help them gather insights, prototype things, you know, test things a little bit faster. But I think if you're asked to do either of those things, right, the key question would be like, well, what is my metric that I'm trying to move the needle?
Totally.
Like, how do we know that our company is more innovative, in July of 2025 than it was in July of 2024, or that we are more agile? Because companies run on data And,
Mhm.
as much as like I love all the consultants who are like, you need to be a better storyteller and, stories are important and people love to listen to stories. Like it's true in meetings that people love to listen to stories, but then like, at annual reviews and company offsites and, you know, any kind of business oriented meeting, eventually the spreadsheet comes up or the chart comes up and it's like, let's look at the metrics here.
Yeah.
And I just don't know how you operate. I mean, that's part of the reason why every time we survey people and you ask what does senior leadership care about, it's largely like, is innovation driving revenue or is it helping reduce costs and make us more efficient? Everything
Not
else,
complicated.
yeah,
Totally.
it's
Yeah.
not complicated is right. And sometimes you hear about things like perception in the market, and how do people view our brand can also be important, which you can measure in certain ways, right? Like with net promoter score,
And
things
yes,
like
totally.
that,
Yeah. Yeah.
customer surveys. Um, but yeah, I think, a key question with any of these objectives is like, what are my metrics and what is my time frame, where you're expecting to see, real outcomes and changes in those metrics.
Spot on. And it's a really interesting pivot and an interesting thing that I'm curious to hear your take on, which is you also talk in the report about the death of the lab. The innovation lab is done. And so there's this, because you're like, well, you could create like this hacking container where they can do stuff and avoid the bureaucracy. But at the same time, there's this like death of the innovation lab, which I agree with. And actually, interestingly, this year, and we had this conversation again on the LinkedIn Live, like innovation's kind of become a dirty word, sort of like sustainability did, right? It's like, because there's this perception of what value are you providing? And so I'm just wondering if you have, thoughts about then where catalyst or innovation leaders might find themselves in the business outside of an innovation lab to be successful delivering the things that the business is asking them to deliver.
Wow, that's a really good question. It's funny that you brought up sustainability because I just saw on LinkedIn somebody who got sustainability added to their title. So like now they're like I think a VP or SVP of innovation and sustainability. And I kind of read that and I laughed because it's like the two things that innovation and sustainability have in common are really ambitious goals and really lacking resources, or really squeezed resources, right? Like, okay, we're going to be a net zero company by 2035 and we have two people working on it and a college intern and it's very similar, like that sounds very similar to a lot of catalysts and innovation leaders, I think. um but you know the question you asked is hard, which is I think many innovation labs are going away. Like when we did an event in Silicon Valley, and one of the things we like to do is go and visit innovation labs. I mean, we did part of an event at your innovation lab in Vodafone when that existed. And what we found right now is in the Valley, most of the innovation labs that have survived are actually building stuff. It's like car companies and aircraft companies, where they actually need a garage, you know, um, to work on trucks or airplanes or cars or what have you. And then I think outside that, maybe there's a small number of innovation labs that have survived. We talked to somebody from Visa from this report where like, Visa and MasterCard and, to some extent, I guess American Express too, right? Like they're really multi-party systems where like they care about merchants and they care about banks and they want to bring everybody together and get them excited about the future of payments. And so I think if you really are a true ecosystem player that depends on a lot of those relationships for your revenue growth, maybe an innovation lab, where you can show people cool prototypes or visions of the future is still surviving. We just have like a hard time finding them. And so I do think we are in this phase, and we have been in this phase since 2000 of trying to figure out how to make innovation happen on Zoom and on Teams and you know with Miro boards and in these much more virtual places. And I think the upside of it, when I talk to people who are doing more like online presentations where they used to bring everybody the company together for an offsite, is more people can participate. You can actually get better engagement from a global company if you're asking them, let's say for input on, hey, here's 5 startups we've evaluated and we might want to partner with them. Like, give us some input on which one you like. Doing that at, headquarters in Topeka, is very different from doing it online where everybody could chime in. So I do think we're still in this era. Like, the reason your question is so hard is like we are still in this era of figuring out, like, if there isn't a place that people are going to, on a daily basis to work together and potentially bring in like outside collaborators and voices, like what is, what is the collaboration, like where does collaboration and co-creation happen?
Yeah, super interesting. I think like spot on about the like if you have to make things. So like J Labs for me is like a great example of like they are paying for space to incubate around their core competencies and bringing that ecosystem approach. But those are few and far between. Like if you're doing digital technology, it's a different conversation. Uh, some of the places that I've seen sort of people who have innovation histories or, are catalyst leaders go or like chief growth officers or something in a growth capacity. Certainly all these new AI roles that are opening up. You don't always have to be a technologist to be helping to lead that strategy. Sort of fizzling out sort of now, but was a place was maybe digital transformation. And then the CX sort of insights, because that's another place that, but also like how are you impacting? Do any of those resonate? And are there other places where you're seeing maybe today more current that innovation leaders / catalysts might pivot to?
AI is the big one. I mean, it's just such a big priority to figure out. Everybody I talk to who I think knows anything about anything says like this is going to be a huge, 20-year transformation of business. Some of the tools are going to work better than others, and some places you apply AI are going to deliver ROI faster than others. But like, to imagine this is like another thing, like, the coming of smartwatches or blockchain or, AR glasses, it's not the same. I mean, there's so many different flavors of AI that there are a lot of companies where they're like, yeah, we've been doing AI for the last 10 years. We just called it machine learning, or we just called it computer vision. And, we got rid of people who were like inspecting the widgets as they went down the line. And now we have a camera that does it equally as good or better. So the AI thing is big. Like we did a podcast with Steve Blank, who's like a super well-known author, advocate of the lean startup approach, has been in Silicon Valley for like the last 40 years. And, he's just like, yeah, this is real. This is like the change that, that the internet and the microchip brought. And so like, don't sleep on it. I kind of feel like I don't quite understand the people who are like, oh, this is really overhyped and there's going to be another trend next year. I just think maybe they've been a little bit brainwashed by, you know, by maybe like the media and the analyst firms' desire for there always to be another trend to
Right.
sell and to publish white papers and thought leadership about. Um, and so there can be a little bit of a boy who cried wolf dynamic
That's a
happening
good
when you
take
talk
on
about
it.
new technologies, but like, you know, the one experience I had was like networking of computers, both right before the internet and during the early internet days. And like that was a pretty big change. And I think some businesses are still trying to get used to that change, right? Like we all have local merchants where I still could not order something from my local hardware store and pay for it and have somebody deliver it, to my door, right? Like
Yeah.
still have to walk over there and like search through the aisles and stuff. So yeah, I think it's AI is the big thing that people should be learning about and experimenting with the tools and just becoming an internal expert on. And I think I just would put a period at the end of that sentence. I mean, there are other, innovators often get pulled back into line of business roles or functional roles because it's a promotion and that's where the action is. And so like we'll always, we'll always see that. But I do think the center of the action right now is AI strategy and AI policy and making sure that you don't really get left behind because you underinvested in AI.
I totally agree. Because I also think that human brains can't. I love the book Abundance because it talks so much about how human brains can't understand really exponentiality, and I think that the change is going to just be on this insanely exponential curve. And so I think we were all kind of underestimating that the impact that this is going to have. And I think it is a really smart place. And interestingly, I think it goes to like it is one of the places, one of the technology, one of the tools that's going to help catalyst slash innovators have an impact on growth and drive agility, like sort of hand in hand. So I think, again, if this is what the business is asking of you and you're not paying attention to AI, you're missing a trick to be able to deliver what the business is asking for. But it does lead into an interesting question, which I kind of wish now that I had started with, which is,
Well, there's
given
always
that
editing, Shannon, we can just
we're just
we
having
can
a
just pretend we
conversation.
just
It's all good. It's all good. Given the AI and taking a step back, when I was more in the corporate world, sort of pre-pandemic doing innovation, it really did feel like it was a capacity that organizations needed to future-proof themselves. And I was always having to make the case of change and the pace of change accelerating and all of that. And obviously the pandemic has we don't need to have the VUCA conversation anymore. We don't need to have that
Mhm.
conversation. And so I'm wondering what is the role in your mind of innovation, particularly in large organizations now? Because it's like there's not a single part of the organization that doesn't need to be able to adapt to change really fast.
All that is true. I mean, my hypothesis in 2024, and like we talk about this a lot internally, and like we've been talking about this a lot with our advisors in corporate, who are working in corporate roles, is like institutionalizing this function is really important and making sure that people think it's here to stay and that it's resourced and respected in a way that it's here to stay is super important. And everything else follows from that. But that is job number one is like, I don't think this needs to be as big as the marketing function or the human resources function or the sales and biz dev function, but like it does need to be thought of as like something that's important and here to stay. And then what is its role? Its role is always to be kind of hedging your bets and trying to see around corners and trying to get close to customers, today's customers and future customers or potential customers, and yeah, maybe even working on company culture if that's what your C-suite cares about. And if you found some metrics that seem reasonable to you, I do think that's a big part of the role. And then in the context of AI, most companies, separate from like understanding the technology landscape and what's emerging, I think most companies haven't really set out a vision for like, where do we want to get with AI? And for that reason, it's really scary to people,
Mm,
because everybody's mind, when you start talking about AI and the potential goes to like, wait, am I going to have a job in 2 years or 5 years or 10 years? Like, um, I think manufacturing and factory line workers and those widget inspectors have been worrying about this for a while, but now like every knowledge worker is worrying about this. And so I think innovation people and catalysts can help to like, let's shape that vision of what kind of company are we trying to be. And some of that may be like preserving roles for humans, even when AI could do it cheaper, because actually we think our brand, presents better when you feel you know, like if you're Four Seasons, right? The phone rings once and someone picks it up. Like that's better than like, hey, I'm the AI chatbot. How can I help you?
right.
So yeah, so I think contributing to that vision is really just going to be an important part of the role.
It's a great segue to the follow-up question that I had, which is, we work with organizations where one of their core values out of 3 or 4 is innovation. And the implication is there's innovation with a capital I and innovation with a little I. And I'm wondering what you see as like the rest of the employee base's responsibility or relationship with lowercase innovation and how innovation leaders can help bridge that or bring them along.
And when you say lowercase I, do you mean kind of like incremental, like improvements to processes and to products and things like that?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think with both lowercase and uppercase, you know, thinking about this as a network where everybody has something to contribute. Like often there can be, I think you've probably written about this in the past and made the point that like salespeople should love innovation and innovators should love salespeople, right? Because they're always talking to customers. They want to have something new to talk about with customers. They hear the explanation of why the customer decided to defect to the rival. Like, I think there's all those kinds of relationships. Even, sometimes with legal and compliance people, there can be great partnerships where like you find the one legal person that's like, yeah, I really do want to understand all of our risks of, potentially hoovering in somebody else's intellectual property into our LLM. And, you know, and so there are people in legal risk and compliance that want to be at the cutting edge and helping build the new stuff. So I think whether it's small I or big I, when you totally are on an island and you don't have those give and take relationships, you get into trouble.
Totally agree. And total shout out for like the legal and the procurement people, like innovators, you need to have great relationships with them. Scott, I could talk to you for hours and hours, and I'm so grateful, really, again, for the research that you bring into the world. We really need that independent, neutral convener of insights around this. I do want to end with, do you have one or two favorite inspirational catalysts you want to share with us?
Inspirational catalysts like people, like humans we're talking about?
Yeah. Unless you have some dogs or friends, I don't know.
No, it's such a good question. I mean, I've been working on this nonprofit project here in Boston called the Innovation Trail, which is kind of
I
looking at like
saw that. That's so cool.
yeah, Boston's an old city, and so I love history and innovation. So kind of looking at all the just different breakthroughs. And I mean, some of the people that are my favorite catalysts are really people from the past, like Alexander Graham Bell really wanted to help deaf people. And that was the driver of the research that led him to invent the telephone in Boston in the 1800s. Um, in particular, like people who just were working in places that you just never would have expected, um, Black children of, freed slaves who would like, there's a particular guy, Lewis Latimer, that I find really inspiring, who taught himself how to be a patent draftsman and drew the patent for the telephone, like with no formal education, and was working in a patent office and, later went on to work with Thomas Edison. And obviously, like just a lot of the women who were like early professors at MIT and Margaret Hamilton, who was one of the first uh, um, computer programmers who worked on the Apollo spacecraft. I just love not the people who are like the discoverers or inventors or first patenters, but like the people who were just, you know, really working in systems that did not welcome them with open arms and still were catalysts despite all those headwinds. That's really what inspires me.
Amen. That is super inspirational. We'll put those people in the show notes. I didn't realize that Alexander Graham Bell was in Boston. That's a good fun fact for the day.
For sure. Yeah, he was like not a professor, but I think he was like an adjunct instructor at my alma mater, Boston University, which is just down the street that way.
Awesome. Scott, always a pleasure. Thanks for making time for us.
No, thanks for all the great questions. I really enjoyed it.
To our listeners, thanks so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about how to create bold, powerful change in the world, check out our book, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burnout, or go to the website, catalystconstellations.com. And if you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did, take 10 seconds to rate it on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Of course, if you have other catalysts in your life, hit the share button and send a link their way. Thanks again.